It would not be time to fully describe all the key relationships that relate to profit, so I'm going to work through this summary table with you. I've split these key ratios into primary ratios on the left and secondary or proxy ratios on the right. The primary ratios could be considered core to fully describing different aspects of a dairy business. So these are the ratios that ideally everyone should be monitoring. The secondary or proxy ratios describe a similar aspect of the business to the ratios listed to their left. All these ratios can be used for comparative analysis between farms. There are other important ratios, such as return on equity or equity percentage, that are specific to the individual business and not included in this presentation. All of the R-squared values are listed in the highlighted columns, with these confirming the proportion of the variation in profitability as defined by return on capital that can be explained by that factor. The R-squared value for farm data is unlikely to be very high, but even within a region, there are farms with different land capability, management capability, rainfall, stocking rate, and production system. This results in so many factors contributing to profit that it's difficult to single out just one factor as the cause. However, a low R-squared value does not mean that a relationship is not statistically significant or that it is not important to the level of profit on a farm or for the competitiveness of a dairy industry. The left-hand column of R-squared values for the primary ratios are ranked from highest to lowest. All of the p-values are listed in the highlighted columns, with these detailing the significance of the relationship. For an association between two variables to be considered statistically significant, typically a p-value of less than 0.05 is used as a threshold. That is, there is less than a 5% chance that the association has occurred due to random variation. The great majority of ratios that I will present have a p-value of less than 0.001, which means there was less than one chance in 1,000. This association has occurred by chance. So all the trends being described are strong. Return on capital is the ratio that defines profit, with this being the return on the value of all assets employed in the business. Profit ratios must reference capital, although profit per hectare and profit per cow only reference a portion of capital, namely the land or the cows. Although these two ratios could be described as proxies for profit, each has substantial weaknesses. Profit per hectare depends hugely on the productivity of the land, though the profit per hectare required to get, say, a 5% return on capital on highly productive or irrigated land is very different to what would be required on dry land, if this dry land has half the potential pasture harvest of the more productive land. Similarly, the size or capacity of the cows and the total value of farm assets being carried per cow will determine the profit per cow required to attain a specific return on capital. Profit margin ratios are particularly important for quantifying risk and describing how resilient a business is to changes in milk price, supplement price, or climatic conditions. Operating profit margin is the more complete measure, as it assesses the margin on every dollar earned, as opposed to just the revenue from milk with profit per litre. Cost of production per litre and total expenses per litre are both excellent total cost measures. Cost of production is considered a more complete measure, as it includes revenue from livestock and other non-milk dairy sales, which offset the expenses associated with these non-milk sales, resulting in a more correct cost of production for milk. This methodology allows cost of production to be directly compared to milk price, with the difference being the profit margin prior to debt servicing or other investments. Pasture harvest has the highest correlation to profit compared to all other ratios, and by a wide margin, apart from partial profit and total cost ratios. The next highest correlating ratio to profit is pasture cost per tonne dry matter. And given how fundamental pasture is to dairy farm profitability, this second pasture-related ratio should be included as a primary ratio. This mix of a physical pasture measure and a financial measure ensures these two ratios provide different insights into pasture performance. Milk price is a primary ratio, but this needs to be calculated on the basis of energy-corrected milk to have this level of relevance. Milk production per hectare and stocking rate effectively describe a similar impact. As I'll demonstrate shortly, Milk production per cow within this data set does not explain any of the variation in profit. So all of the correlation of milk production per hectare with profit is driven by stocking rate. Supplement cost per litre, which includes concentrates and forages such as hay and silage, and total feed cost per litre, which also includes pasture, have similar correlations with profit. For pasture-based farms, there should already be a couple of ratios being used to monitor pasture production and cost. So it'd be logical to use supplement cost per litre to focus on supplements. This core per cow cost ratio was developed by my software company, Red Sky, so that a group of costs related to the cows that do not include supplements or people, which require their own targeted ratios, could be monitored. This table outlines the range and proportion of each cost centre included in this ratio. Effectively, this provides an opportunity to monitor specific cow cost codes. There are a group of labour ratios that farmers can be encouraged to monitor in different countries, and hopefully these can now be ranked appropriately. The largest proportion of staff time in a dairy business is associated with cows, including milking, feeding, and caring for these cows. So the ratios with the strongest causal link to profit will be those referencing cows. The primary ratio is labour cost per cow, with the labour cost including a full cost of management. Labour cost per cow and per litre are similar ratios in structure. So if a second labour ratio would be monitored, then it should be selected from one of these other two ratios. Again, the causal link with cows and profit would mean that cows per full-time staff equivalent would be preferred. There is another weakness with the litre ratios, in that these need to be calculated based on energy-corrected milk to have this level of relevance. This core per hectare cost per tonne dry matter of pasture harvest ratio was also developed by Red Sky, so that a group of costs related to the land area that do not include supplements or people could be monitored. This table outlines the range and proportion of each cost centre included in the calculation. This ratio is the most relevant for determining the performance of a dairy business and controlling farm area or hectare costs, which to be relevant and have significance needs to reference the amount of pasture harvested per hectare. Pasture as a percent of the cow's diet is the ratio that describes the farm production system being implemented. The relevance of this ratio will be described in depth later in this presentation. Pasture consumed per cow is a similar ratio in most regards, though would be a secondary ratio. You may have noticed that milk production per cow is neither a primary nor a secondary or proxy ratio. The reason for this will become clear shortly.